All right, let's talk about a word that is, without a doubt, one of the most misunderstood and emotionally charged in all of behavior science: punishment. In everyday life, that word just brings up all these negative, kind of harsh images. But in the world of applied behavior analysis, or ABA, it means something incredibly specific. And that's exactly what we're going to unpack right now.
So, here's how we're going to break this down. First, we're going to completely redefine the term. Then, we'll get into the two main types you'll hear about: positive and negative. We'll look at some really clear examples of each, cover the absolutely critical rules and risks involved, and then wrap it all up with your key takeaway. Sound good? Let's jump in.
Okay, first things first. The most important step here is to draw a really clear line in the sand between the scientific definition of punishment and the one we use just, talking every day. They are not the same thing. Not even close.
I mean, think about it for a second. When you hear the word punishment, what's the first thing that pops into your head? For most of us, right, it's things like yelling, being mean, spanking, some form of abuse even. It's usually an action that's meant to be harsh or make someone suffer. But in ABA, that's just not what we're talking about. This is it. This is the scientific definition. Punishment is simply a consequence that makes a behavior go down. That's the whole deal. It is defined 100% by its effect on what happens next. So if a consequence is applied and the behavior doesn't decrease, well, guess what? It wasn't punishment. Doesn't matter how unpleasant it seemed, the data tells the story.
So let's get into the two big categories. This is where we hear the words positive and negative. And just like the word punishment, these probably don't mean what you think they mean. But don't worry, there's a super simple rule to remember everything.
Just think of it like simple math. Positive is like a plus sign. It means you add something. Negative is like a minus sign. It means you remove or take something away. It has absolutely nothing to do with good or bad. So positive punishment means you add a consequence. Negative punishment means you remove something. That's the key.
So let's kick things off with positive punishment. Remember our rule? This is when a consequence is added after a behavior. And the whole point is to make that behavior happen less in the future.
You'll see a whole bunch of different procedures that fall under this umbrella. They range from things that are pretty common, like reprimands and overcorrection, to more intense stuff, like contingent exercise. And then way at the far end of the spectrum, you have some extremely controversial and very rarely used methods. For our purposes, we're just going to focus on a couple of the most common examples to see how it works. So one of the main procedures you'll hear about is something called overcorrection. The whole idea here is that after a problem behavior happens, the person has to do something effortful to correct the situation, and then some. It's really all about making things right again.
It actually comes in two flavors. First, there's restitutional overcorrection. That's when you fix whatever happened, plus you make the environment even better. So if you spill water on a table, you have to clean up the spill and then wipe down the whole table. The other type is positive practice. That's when you have to repeatedly practice the correct way of doing something. So if you throw a toy, now you have to practice putting it away nicely 10 times in a row.
And this is where things get really, really interesting, and you see why we can't just guess. Think about a simple reprimand, like saying, hey, stop that. That seems like a classic punisher, right? But what if that person is acting out specifically to get attention? In that case, your punishment is actually giving them exactly what they want. You might accidentally be rewarding the behavior, making it happen more. It always comes back to the function of the behavior.
All right, let's flip the script and talk about the other side. Negative punishment. Remember our rule? Negative means to remove or take something away. In this case, we are taking away something the person likes in order to make a behavior happen less often. The first procedure here is response cost. The easiest way to think about this, it's like a fine. You engage in the problem behavior, you lose a specific amount of something you've earned. This could be losing a token from your token board, or maybe losing 5 minutes of recess time.
Okay, now for the one everybody's heard of, timeout. But here's the thing, the full name is super important. It's timeout from positive reinforcement. It is not just about sending someone to a corner. It's about temporarily removing their access to all the good stuff. For a timeout to have any chance of working, the time-in environment, where they were before, has to be fun and full of things the person actually wants. If it's not, then timeout is meaningless.
And not all timeouts are created equal. There's actually a whole hierarchy, from least restrictive to most. You can have a non-exclusionary timeout, like planned ignoring, where you just briefly pull your attention away. Then there's exclusionary, where the person is actually removed from the spot,
like sitting in the hallway. And at the most restrictive end, you have seclusion, where a person is placed alone in a separate room.
Okay, so now that we know what these procedures actually are, we've got to talk about what is, hands down, the most important part of this whole conversation: the ethics, the rules, and the risks. These are not first-line treatments, and for a very good reason.
So, let's do a super quick recap before we dig into the rules. Positive punishment, we add a consequence, like a reprimand. Negative punishment, we remove a stimulus, like with a timeout. Got it? Okay, now let's talk about all the things that have to be in place to even think about using these.
For any of these procedures to even have a chance of working, and working ethically, a bunch of things must be true. The consequence has to be immediate, like right away. It has to be consistent, every single time. You have to make sure the problem behavior isn't secretly getting reinforced somewhere else. But this last one, this is the big one. You must be teaching and heavily rewarding an alternative, appropriate behavior. We don't just stop behaviors, we have to build better ones to take their place.
And here's another one of those classic traps that shows why this is so tricky. Let's say a student absolutely hates doing their math worksheet. Every time they act out, they get sent to timeout in the hallway. So, is that punishment? Or did they just figure out the perfect way to escape the very thing they wanted to avoid? In that case, what we're calling timeout just became a reward.
And this is exactly why these procedures are approached with so much caution. They can cause some pretty serious side effects. You might see emotional outbursts or even aggression. The person might start avoiding the people or the places that are associated with the punishment. This is why modern ABA will always prioritize reinforcement-based strategies first.
Okay, I know that was a ton of technical info. So if you're going to walk away from this and remember just one thing, what should it be? Let's get it down to a plain English summary.
Here it is in 4 simple steps. Number 1, punishment is a technical term defined by its effect on behavior. It just means the behavior goes down. 2, positive means add, negative means remove. Simple as that. 3, these procedures are risky and they are never the first choice. And 4, this is the most critical point of all, the focus must always be on teaching and reinforcing what you want the person to do instead. So, I'm going to leave you with a question to really think about. Given everything we've talked about, the potential side effects, the ethical minefield, the risk of getting it wrong, what do you think are the absolute, non-negotiable safeguards that have to be in place before a punishment procedure is ever even brought to the table as part of a treatment plan? It's a critical question for anyone in this field. Thanks so much for tuning in.